Who they think they better than? Ain't no comparison to the so-called black or African American. You can drop the African, keep the American. When we say Aborigine and make their world in, I'm going in the same dirt my ancestors buried in. I come from a god and a goddess, so what that make me? Not even Basquiat can trace me. Not even Van Gogh can paint me. The MC in me is the God MC, equals the God in me. I'm focused in, let my mind be free. You too blind to see. The Jews I give is real, it's been real. These ain't shots, they missiles. All you gonna hear is the whistle. Lyrically, this an execution. My verses start revolutions for my people seeking restitution. Since the beginning, fuck evolution. Or maybe my reality is all a dream. I put it together like I was sewing seams. So it seems this is that audio dopamine. Go against the regime, we put you where nobody can hear you scream. And sing you to meet your Elohim. My nigga, this is savage mode. It's something that you can't decode. It started with a spark and I'ma let it explode. I was given the cheat codes that'll let me dump and reload and go through them waves like a fucking torpedo. You dealt the cards of life, I just cut them diamonds with the ace of spades. Y'all scatter like roaches when they facing raid, or vampires when they facing blade. I'm trying to get next to Shireen like I'm getting played. You still stuck as a mental slave. You still stuck in that mental cage. While I'm making easy money, pipping holes in style. This my coming to age. Crowd warm when I'm coming on stage. And when I'm done, they gonna be cheering my name. Drake Cobbs, and nah, I ain't quit my day job. I spit bars. I really rap on my day off. That's real shit. Just give you some tools you can build with. Aim high even if you still miss. Just keep going. It's a climb to the top. And I'ma keep flowing. Down Lake Shore, I'm Chicagoan. Yeah. You niggas is playing checkers, we playing chess. And nigga, this is checkmate. Dre be the big dog and you just a little bait. You out of Africa and we ain't got the same traits. I'm a God being and we ain't got the same fate. My granny died February 18th and I was born on the same date. The chosen one, the ancestors' chosen son. They gave me the golden gun. One shot, that's a hole in one. From the pyramid of the sun, the poverty point. I don't think you niggas is getting the point. We still here. Who said they made the Aboriginals disappear? Your information's lagging in the rear. All you do is teach fear. We copper-colored with woolly hair. Am I speaking clear? So fuck the nonsense. When I rap, I touch your consciousness. From within is where you get your self-confidence. Let's bring it back to dominance. Ain't no confining us. Gonna bring that wild Indian out of us. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. We still here.
And oh yeah, put that Super 7 in the air. Tell me how you feel it when you feeling up there. When you in the sky breathing rarefied air. When you breathing rarefied air, oh yeah. Put that Super 7 in the air. Tell me how you feeling when you feel it up there. When you in the sky breathing rarefied air. When you breathing rarefied air,
just that job theft, that chow mein, that pepper bull, that towel mein, since sunset in the arc of Wayne, my brain moving like Tao Sang, so ass above, it's so below, that up and that down thing, this flow is atmospheric, I call that a crown game, see water is knowledge, so if I'm teaching, you're learning, so how your God make a sun without vortexing current, see the pattern is ponic, I'm reaching out for my people, oh watch me flow through your speakers, you feel the force of the ether, and when the force gets the equal, I'm taking off like an eagle. Police popped the pastor yesterday for pushing put equal. My DNA is Moshe. Mix that thing with higher water. My spirit rate is OTN. It's just a higher order. Got more light than Kavita. Rap a lot just like Tila. Went from sinner to saint. Shout out my big homie Sela. Got more torque than a sports car. Got more work than a door star. In the 4 million I make, I'm giving the Dr. Umar, oh yeah. Put that Super 7 in the air. Tell me how you feeling when you feeling up there. When you in the sky breathing rarefied air. When you breathing rarefied air, oh yeah. Put that Super 7 in the air. Tell me how you feeling when you feel it up there. When you in the sky breathing rarefied air. When you breathing rarefied air, oh yeah. Super 7 in my rites and ceremonies. I'm married to Jehovah, holy matrimony. Confucius say, in the words of Caillou, before you hit the tomb, be a bridegroom. Only got one question for Miss Susan B. On how to last Ahu when it's now a ennui. Blame my inspiration, I'm just thinking thoughts. But in the way of God's, we gon' keep it short. Why Jesus wanna kill me, Matthew 10:34. Just a couple questions that I'm needing to know. Oh, watch me flow, it's so potent. Set the vortex in motion. Super 7, I'm floating across the Aegean Ocean. Oh, you a Muslim now, so I guess you make it Salat. Well, I'm an Israelite, I'ma make you met the Shabbat. Got Moses on the bumper, super slap off in my spaceship photosphere. So I stay lit, peace and light to the faith is oh yeah.
Yeah. Put that super 7 in the air. Tell me how you feeling when you feeling up there. When you in the sky breathing rarefied air. When you breathing rarefied air, oh yeah. Put that super 7 in the air. Tell me how you feeling when you feel it up there. When you in the sky breathing rarefied air. When you breathing rarefied air, oh yeah.
Hey, hey, peace and love to all the Aboriginal Indigenous Indians. Thank you all for coming on through. I just wanted to do a little something real quick and just show y'all some of this information that happened to pop up on my feed. And I got a couple of videos on it as well that I want to dive into as well, because obviously this is a revelation for some, but for others, they've already been aware of this information that Christopher Columbus has Jewish ties. And this is very interesting, you know what I'm saying? And I know how we all feel over here about DNA and the legitimacy behind DNA, but let's just read this article. I just want to jump straight in. I'm not going to waste a lot of time today because I really just got back in town. So shout out to everyone listening. Hey, OTK. Hey, Roy Davenport. Peace and love, Focus Mind. Big Dog Philly OG. And Kenyon Ward. Peace and love to you all. Thank you for coming into the chat. So let me just go to the tab and let's just rock out for a second. So y'all see the title and y'all know what it is. All right. So Christopher Columbus was Jewish. New DNA testing has confirmed, with scientists finally solving the 500-year mystery linked to the legendary explorer's remains. A crack team of researchers have spent the past 20 years conducting a range of advanced DNA testing on various remains to hone techniques that led them to confirm the long-held theory. DNA analysis of the bones, long believed to be Columbus's, took place after access was granted to the resting place beneath Spain's Seville Cathedral. The findings were revealed as part of a new primetime documentary on Spanish television, revealing the remains with absolute certainty were those of the explorer. Antonio Lorente, a professor of legal and forensic medicine at the University of Granada, said the DNA showed a Western Mediterranean origin. However, scientists could not state categorically which country or region. Both in the Y chromosome and in the mitochondrial chromosome of Hernando, there are traits compatible with Jewish origins, Professor Lorente said. The findings coincide with the explorer's National Day in Spain and days before Columbus Day, the U.S. holiday dedicated to the explorer's discovery of the, quote, New World. The new testing allows trace amounts of residual DNA to be compared, in this case, to DNA taken from the explorer's son, Hernando, and brother, Diego, who were also buried beneath Seville Cathedral. However, Francis Albert Darner, A historian who has written extensively about Columbus's origins added doubt to the findings, noted that being Jewish and from Genoa was effectively impossible during the 15th century. I found that quote extremely interesting because I think that's the same notion of being African and American. So I find this very interesting. So, anyway, Jews could only spend 3 days at a time in Genoa by law at that time, said Mr. Albert Donner, excuse me. There were around 200,000 Jews living in Spain in Columbus's time. In the Italian peninsula, it is estimated that there were only between 10,000 and 15,000. There was a much larger Jewish population in Sicily of around 40,000, but we should remember that Sicily in Columbus' time belonged to the crown of Aragon, he said. Mr. Albert Daner said his research has shown that Columbus was from a family of Jewish silk spinners from the Valencia region. Child, this messy right here. This is messy. Look at him. Taking place on the second Monday in October each year in a bid to commemorate the explorers' discovery of the quote New World for Spain on October 12th, 1492. Miguel Lorente, a scientist who headed up the research, said on Thursday, today it has been possible to verify it with new technologies so that the previous partial theory that the remains of the Seville belonged to Christopher Columbus has been definitively confirmed. Columbus, an Italian explorer and navigator from the Republic of Genoa, died aged 55 in 1506. Passing in the northwest Spanish city of Valladolid, excuse me, Valad, oh shit, I practiced this, Valladolid. He wished to be buried on the island of Hispaniola that is today shared by the Dominican Republic and Haiti. His remains were later taken to the island in 1542 before moved to Cuba in 1795 before traveling to Spain in 1898. So his remains were later taken to the island in 1542 before being moved to Cuba in 1795 before traveling to Spain in 1898. Yeah, all right. Since his death, the remains have been moved several times, with some experts claiming the explorer had previously been buried in the Dominican Republic. Child, who bones they got? Despite experts believing for years that the hidden tomb beneath the cathedral held the explorer's remains, it was not until 2003 that Lorente and historian Marcial Castro were granted permission to open it. Despite the volume of data, Lorente stated that the outcome is almost absolutely excuse me for 1 second. Ryan, you getting me tripped up. Give me one moment, okay? Despite the volume of data, Lorente stated that the outcome is almost absolutely reliable. How? Interesting. Hidden inside were the unidentified bones, now confirmed as those of Columbus, ending the 500-year mystery. It comes a day after it was revealed that partial remains of the legendary British explorer Sandy Irvine, who disappeared more than 100 years ago, are believed to have been discovered on Mount Everest. Andrew Common Sandy Irvine, then aged 22, vanished on the mountain on June 8, 1924, after setting off an expedition hoping to conquer the legendary peak. Up until now, there has been a widespread speculation surrounding the explorer's fate, with the remains of his climbing partner, renowned mountaineer George Mallory, only uncovered in 1999. Okay, so anyway, I don't know why they went into that. All right, so let me stop sharing and let me share another screen for 1 second. Peace and love, family. Thank you guys for rolling in. So let me show y'all this quick news clip. It's not a long one. All right, so let's share that. All right.
Columbus is a name that changed the world. He opened the doors to a new continent, but his own story remained a mystery until now. For over 500 years, historians have argued about his origins, and now a team of researchers have finally cracked the code. After 2 decades of meticulous DNA analysis, they've uncovered a startling new truth about the identity of Columbus. Columbus's heritage points to Sephardic Jewish origins rooted in the Jewish communities of Spain, which means his journey was not just one of geography, but also of an era marked by exile and secret identities. In the 1490s, Spain's Catholic monarchs forced the Jews to convert or leave. Columbus sailed for the New World under royal funding, yet carrying a hidden heritage of his own. After centuries of rival claims about his final resting place, the remains in Spain's Seville Cathedral have been confirmed as his, with all the genetic clues linking him to a heritage lost in time. The search for his birthplace spans 25 different locations across Western Europe. His true identity may have been lost to time, but now that it's revealed, the tale of Christopher Columbus will be told in a whole new light for the future.
Guys, so they are saying that they found bones under the Seville Cathedral that apparently or allegedly, what in the hell, are Christopher Columbus's. Child, stop this nonsense. And that I just want to know, how does a DNA test link you to Jewish origins or Jewish heritage? I just want to know that. So let's go to this quick little. I got another one too, because apparently these people believe this shit. Like Christopher Columbus, boy, stop playing. You ain't discover America. You ain't discover nothing. And your ass was a Jew. Crazy work. All right.
The opening joke goes like this. It's not really that funny, but you know, I'll tell it anyway. So the joke goes: a guy goes into a tailor shop to buy a suit, and he's looking at all the different materials, a very beautiful material, very beautiful textiles and cuts and colors and so on, but the prices are all really too high. So the salesman says, well, how much do you have to spend? He says, well, I have $50. $50, we can help you out, no problem. Brings out a suit, he says, here, try this on. Goes into the change room, comes back out, and he says, what do you think? And he says, you know, I love it, Doc, it's really nice. I mean, the color brings out my eyes and so on. But the only problem is that I noticed that one sleeve is quite a bit longer than the other. He says, no problem. All you have to do is sort of stand sideways and hike up one sleeve. He says, oh, you know, that does that, Taka. That's good. And he says, and there's just one other thing. I noticed that one of the legs of the pants is also quite a bit longer. He says, no problem. Just sort of crouch down and stick out that leg a bit and it'll be fine. So he says, you know, it actually works. So he pays for the suit. He walks out and he's walking along the street like this. And across the street, there's Sam and Madge. And Sam says to Madge, Madge, look at that guy walking down the street in such a funny way. And Madge says, yeah, but look how good his suit fits. Thank you. I'll let that sink in a little bit there. Tonight's lecture, of course, brings the fall semester to a close. And it's a bit of a cliffhanger because we're going to wrap up some of the themes that we discussed and look towards the spring semester where we will be focusing on the Sephardic diaspora. Sephardic life in the Iberian Peninsula ends at the end of the 15th century, 1492 in Spain, and then 1497 in Portugal. But next semester in February, we're going to look at those places where the Sephardim spread. We'll be able to trace them by following the establishment of Chinese restaurants all across the Mediterranean basin. And then we will we'll see how resilient and remarkable this ethnic subgroup of the Jewish people is. It's an amazing story that I'm getting a tremendous amount of personal chizuk, personal encouragement from learning more about them.
He just got started.
Let's do a little bit of good and welfare. Tonight's lecture, by the way, is a little bit of a quirky lecture compared to most of them. You know, I focus primarily on biographies, and we have to do a bit of a biographical spin today because we're going to look at one specific question: was Christopher Columbus Jewish? It's not such a simple question. There are some relevant material. Tonight's lecture is sponsored by Christopher and Anne-Marie Bray. They sponsored actually a series of lectures right after Hurricane Irma. Since this is the end of our 60% of our viewers are from the States. The other, we have the average view duration of 15 shiurim. They like to hear classes. You can actually just listen or even download and play it. It's translated into English, which was helpful. Both Jewish in existence, and I think it has tremendous value for non-Jews as well. So that gives me great pleasure. But it was published back in, I think, 1896, and no one has done this work since. This is, I think, a great PhD. Okay, that's it for good and welfare. Tonight's lecture is going to rely very heavily on the research of Rabbi Dr. Meyer Kaiserling. He wrote a work which was translated into English, which was helpful, on specifically the biography of Christopher Columbus and his connection to the Jews. It was published back in, I think, 1896, and no one has done this work since. This is, I think, a great PhD thesis for anyone out there who's looking for a graduate topic. It's 100 years since anyone looked at this question, and it is a fascinating question. When I did my initial research and I just kind of wandered around the web, I see that people are still writing about this in the popular media today. There's a lot of fascinating material, and so we're going to rely heavily on his research. Even though it's 100 years old, it's still got some freshness to it and some vitality. He was a rabbi who was associated with the Wissenschaft des Judentums movement, kind of a secularizing approach to Jewish culture that saw much of the religious activity in a historical bent, a student of Leopold Zunz. More familiar to this audience, he was a student of Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch as well, served as a rabbi in Switzerland and later in Budapest, Hungary. Okay, so here the big question is, was Christopher Columbus Jewish? What is the Hava Amina? What is the presumption that one would think he was Jewish? This is the best portrait we have of him. It was made posthumously by some 10, 15 years, if I remember correctly. We don't even know exactly what he looked like. And we are talking about the end of the 15th century. Plastic arts are very well developed. Portraiture is very developed. This is one of those great figures who was obviously pivotal in world history. We talk about the Columbian Exchange, the whole globalization that is still something we live with today and are grappling with today in our economies and our cultures. It's all a result of Columbus's bold decision to try and find the Indies, and he ended up stumbling across America, of course. There's a lot more complexities to that story, which we will not go into, but he's an enigmatic character, and the Jewish aspect of him is really quite fascinating. So the question, so was Christopher Columbus Jewish? The answer is, to give it away, we can all go home right now, probably not. It is highly unlikely that he was, in fact, Jewish. But still, we still have the question, why wouldn't one think so? Let us just quickly look at the work of Cecil Roth. We actually studied his work earlier.
All right, y'all. So look, this interview particular came out 6 years ago. So I just wanted to play this because it's very fascinating now that they decide that they have information through DNA analysis due to new technology or what have you, that now they can say for sure that he's Jewish, when people who have looked into this doesn't really think that that's the case. But now with the new news coming out, I find it very, very interesting. So I just want to hear what they had to say as well. So I'm sorry for not giving y'all that notation that this was 6 years prior. So someone thought about this, and people have been thinking about this notion that he was Jewish, and that can have a lot of implications for how we see the world and what's happening today. So that's why I think that this is important. And obviously in light of Indigenous Peoples Day and in light of what the fuck they said Columbus did, I think this is just something good to go over and just some information to enlighten anyone who may not have known this, because I didn't know it. Like the article, like I said, just kind of, hold up, let me see, just kind of caught me off guard that they were able to do this. So all right, give me a moment.
He wrote several books on the history of the Inquisition and the experience of Jews in the late 15th century Spain. He wrote about Columbus that the mystery regarding Columbus's origins is largely the outcome of his own mendacity, meaning Columbus himself enjoyed projecting the image that he was secretly Jewish. It was kind of like a chutzpah kind. So anyways, his own mendacity, meaning he used to lie, he used to dissuade, he used to try to put it in people's faces, like, don't mess with me because I have Jewish blood. He would say, like, do you know who I am? I descend from King David. He would say things like this. He would write things like this. And he openly cultivated this kind of mystique surrounding his lineage that he hoped would add to his own grandeur. There are many characters like this you see in Jewish history. Another good example of someone who actually was ethnically Jewish would be, for example, Benjamin Disraeli, who was baptized and lived his life as a Christian, but he really enjoyed throwing it in the faces of his parliamentary interlocutors.
The Lubis, let me respond to you really quickly. Hello, good evening. Thank you for coming into my chat. I appreciate it. Lubis, listen, I just showed an article that stated that, hold on, let me share this tape instead real quick, that Christopher Columbus kept secret he was Jewish as DNA testing reveals Spanish roots solving 500-year mystery. So I'm guessing, was Jewish. They're saying he was Jewish through DNA testing, through bones that they found under the Spanish Seville Cathedral. So that's why I'm going into this. So, we don't know if he has Jewish ties or not. That's why we're getting into this. So just because he's Spanish, that don't mean shit. That don't mean shit according to these people. See that right there? All right.
For all the latest, Christopher Columbus is a name that changed the world. He opened the doors to a new continent, but his own story remained a mystery until now. For over 500 years, historians have argued about his origins, and now a team of researchers have finally cracked the code. After 2 decades of meticulous DNA analysis, they've uncovered a startling new truth about the identity of Columbus. Columbus's heritage points to Sephardic Jewish origins, rooted in the Jewish communities of Spain, which means his journey was not just one of geography, but also of an era marked by exile.
Rooted in the Jewish communities in Spain. So, Lubis, you're saying, no, he's Spanish. Is there not Jewish communities in Espanol? They said they dug it up. They just did this. When they do this shit, hold up. They just did this. They just shared it on a documentary that came out in Spain. They didn't show it here, but it came out in Spain that they uncovered the DNA or whatever. They confirmed that it was actually his. 500-year-old mystery solved as Christopher Columbus remains absolutely confirmed using new DNA evidence. This article came out October 12th. So the same article. So I guess they first uncovered his bones in 03. And then now recently, with newer updates to DNA and technology and stuff, now they were able to confirm that those were his bones under that cathedral due to DNA analysis from his son, allegedly. So, hey, Drake Hobbs. So, yeah, that's the T. You know it. All right, so let me go back to this professor or whatever.
That he in fact was Jewish, and he had a unique kind of skill and a unique kind of logic that they had no access to. So he played up this quite a bit, and we shall see some of them. But since Columbus frequently made these references, and his background is incredibly murky, Roth concludes, as a result, it is equally impossible to exclude or to confirm the hypothesis that he was descended from a Jewish or an ex-Jewish family. In other words, we probably not, but there's enough nagging doubts that at least we can talk about it for half an hour or so. Let's look at those nagging doubt issues. So here we go. But first of all, his surname, we say Columbus in English, but it would be Colon. He also signed his name as Colom, Christophe Colomb. This was a common Italian Jewish name, excuse me. So used quite often by Italian Jews. He could connect himself to many Italian Jewish families. There's quite a bit of dispute as to whether or not he came from Italy. He refers to himself as coming from Genoa. Also, there's documents that indicate he may have come from Majorca, even documents that he may have come from Poland, which is another possibility for this Jewish origins. But
they don't even know where Christopher Columbus really come from. This is insanity.
None of them are really very reliable. Quite likely he may have come from Sicily. So the last name is something. The first name, definitely not. Christopher, of course, means bearer of Christ, one who carries Christ. So that's not a typical Jewish name, just like Mary. As I mentioned earlier, Columbus loved making references to his Jewish origins in person and in writing. This is kind of like a dangerous thing to do because we're living in a period when the conversos are being actively persecuted, and at the same time, he was kind of like a transitional liminal figure that was moving in and out of many royal courts from Portugal and Spain, Italy, elsewhere, trying to gain support for his venture. And whatever he thought would make himself look more exotic and more appealing in his request, he would not hesitate to use. But nevertheless, that's part of it. Third, we know he had a lot of Jewish friends. He had a tremendous amount of associations with Jews. He was very close with Abraham Zacuto in Portugal. You recall we spoke about him for an hour a few weeks ago. And he relied very heavily on Zacuto's astronomical research. The astrolabe that Zacuto had refined by making it out of metal was incredibly important to Columbus, as was the Alphonsine tables that were translated through Hebrew into Latin for him. He had many Jews on his ship. We're not precisely sure because we only have like the ship manifests. They're not complete, and they have surnames. Very many of them, we simply don't know what the biographies of them are. We do know that his translator was Jewish. This is, by the way, a typical kind of Jewish profession. Jews in medicine, Jews in law, Jews in finance, and Jews in linguistics are very big. Jews, the exception of American Jewry, it's a very unusual exception, 20th century American Jewry, very monolingual. But for the most part, Jews typically are polyglots, speaking several languages and very valuable to their host societies as a result. I have a feeling that might be because Jews tend to exist on the outsides of mainstream society. in America, where we were accepted so well and so deeply, especially in the second half of the 20th century, we lost a lot of our linguistic skill because it was not necessary. But in the first half of the 20th century and earlier, perhaps in the later 21st century, we will develop that again. Hard to say. He was also very close to conversos, that is, Jews who had converted to Christianity during the course of the Inquisition. In particular, de Santagel, who was one of his main economic backers, a very important person in the royal court of Isabel and Ferdinand, who supported him and made crucial recommendations to allow the king and queen.
It always go back to Ferdinand. It always goes back to that Ferdinand. Always. Always. Peace to the chat. Peace to you, Drake Hobbs. You funny. Yeah, like I only brought this out because they did this 6 years ago. So this was before this article ever came out. Like he said earlier in the beginning, he said that no one really has studied this question for real since 1896. So he did this 6 years ago, and then now they want to come out with an article, and a documentary stating that they found Christopher Columbus's bones under that cathedral and that they have Jewish origins. I'm trying to understand how a DNA test is doing that. But so now we want to get into the history a little bit to try to get an understanding of what's happening and how did they come up with this conclusion, and what research did they really do to prove this theory. I mean, obviously the whole Christopher Columbus thing is a theory in itself because we know he ain't discovered America. So it's just like the notion that he's a Sephardic Jew is insane. So I just want to just, touch on this and really get behind the history of this just for a second. And then I'm gonna get into a lecture about the early Atlantic exploration. And I found that interesting too. So we're gonna get into that in a second.
To promote his work, and a man named Sanchez as well, another major backer. And in fact, when he actually discovered the New World and he returned back and landed in the coast of Africa, he immediately sent letters describing his discovery to the king and queen. Obviously, he couldn't send letters back from the New World because the postal service was not too great, connecting transcontinental messages. But he did not address those letters to the king and queen. He sent them to his Jewish buddies or his converso buddies, de Santagel and Sanchez. Very unusual that they would be the first people he writes to. There are some really tantalizing things. Like, for example, he was the ships. And by the way, you should recall that he spent about a decade petitioning wealthy kingdoms to back his enterprise, pushing for his idea, bouncing from state to state, spent a lot of time in Portugal, no luck there, eventually ended up in Spain and got a positive yes from Isabel and Ferdinand. And the ships were completely outfitted in the first week of the month of Av. And he was ready to go on Tisha B'Av of 1492, and he delayed it one day, even though everything was set to go. But since that is an inauspicious day in the Jewish calendar for travel, one does not embark on major journeys of any type on Tisha B'Av. For reasons that no one can really adduce, he decided to push off this highly anticipated departure for the day after. He wanted to not leave on Tisha B'Av, perhaps. Then we have lots of things that he himself said in his own writings, like his journal of his trip to America, which of course was a very celebrated work, began with the sentence, "On the day that the Jews were expelled from Spain, I set out for the New World." I mean, the very first clause of the very first sentence of his journal references the Jews and their situation.
Was anyone aware of that? That his journal, one of the first lines of his journal stated that once the Jews were expelled from Spain. Did you hear him? Hold up.
have lots of things that he himself said in his own writings, like his journal of his trip to America, which of course was a very celebrated work, began with the sentence, "On the day that the Jews were expelled from Spain, I set out for the New World." I mean, the very first.
So allegedly, when Spain dispelled all the Jews, he then went out on his voyage to quote unquote discover America, which we know ain't true.
First clause of the very first sentence of his journal references the Jews and their situation in the Iberian Peninsula. A remarkable kind of way to begin this document. It doesn't begin that something like, "I knew I would find land." It begins with, "The Jews were expelled from Spain." Let's have a look at some of his personal correspondence. Here's one of the few letters that we have in his own hand that he wrote to his son Diego. There's a whole story about what happens after he discovers the New World. He ends up kind of dying in disgrace and madness and not having any credit. And so we do have a lot of material from after the discoveries as well. This is one of those letters. And you'll see on the top left corner, there's this funny little squiggle right where the arrow is, right where the cursor is, you see over here, that is not part of the letter text itself. And looks a little bit like he's testing out the ballpoint on his pen. But of course, this is about 400 years before they invented ballpoints. So what exactly is that? Some scholars have opined that it looks something like the traditional invocation at the beginning of a Hebrew letter. The letter is Beit Hey. I didn't have my computer easy access to handwritten letters. Like, it would look a little different if you wrote them by script rather.
First of all, that do not look like that. Put a one in the chat if that look like those images he's showing, and put a two in the chat if it don't. I think his first sentiment was correct, that he was just testing if the ink was good. Okay.
Rather than in the Assyrian block.
So those are the images he's trying to say that little thing looked like right there. Boy, stop slicing it.
Block script like this. But in fact, you can conceivably see you've got the Beit on the right and the Hey on the left in a cursive script, which is an abbreviation for the term Baruch Hashem, or blessed is the name, which reminds me of a joke that I will try to tell you right after this. So the signing the beginning of his letters with this strange little squiggle. And by the way, he only did it in his letters to his sons. He didn't write it to other people. So just as a family thing, perhaps then is Baruch Hashem. And you may be asking, but it's on the wrong side of the page. What do you want from him? He's pretending anyways. I don't know. It's true. Normally you would write this on the right-hand side of the page, but it's not at all uncommon to see it at the center at top as well.
You see, his position is that Christopher Columbus is not Jewish. But in light of this information that has just now come out, it's just interesting to go back over this and hear what he has to say, in light of what they've just discovered. And it's like, bruh, come on now. Y'all can find Christopher Columbus bones, but y'all can't find one slave boat. I done missed all of the BS. I mean, 500 years, you can find his bones and DNA tested for DNA of Jewish descent. Interesting. Daughter of the sea, period. Damn, OTK. Hey, Dots. Sister, I love you so much. Peace to you, Dots. Shout out to everyone that's popping in and out of the chat. I really do appreciate the love and support. Just like, share, subscribe. That just takes a second. Shout out to you, beautiful Dots. Let's talk about it. And I think, like I said, it's just interesting to touch on Columbus, obviously for obvious reasons in light of today and what today's supposed to mean for us. But they done turned it into some BS for this story. You know, I found it pretty off-putting, honestly. But let's just keep going.
So what'd be terrible if he puts it on the left? You know, it doesn't even look very neat, but you know, neither does his Castilian there too. One last detail from this same letter. He developed this rather unusual signature that he was very particular about. You can just see it here. I have another copy that shows it in a little bit greater contrast here. No one has yet been able to decipher this strange signature that not only did he use in the latter years of his life, but he insisted that his children also use this signature, which is a strange kind of thing to do. You know, I want you to sign my name like I sign this name, you know, not on checks or something like that. This part we can sort of figure out. The X is, of course, the Greek chi letter, as in Christos, and this is the Greek R and the Greek O. So Christo, this is a short form for Christopher, let's say, or just for Christo at any rate. And then Ferenz is a Latinized version of the fur part in Christopher, meaning the one who bears Christ, right? Christos, Ferenz, Christopher. So that part is easy. But what's the business with this, either the Latin letter X or the Greek letter chi, an M and a Y, which could be an U, and the SAS with those two dots around the S's, which he insisted on being written exactly like this, in this shape, and so on. So Cecil Roth, a major historian who we saw a little while ago, he argued, not specifically, not really convincingly, but nevertheless it's worth noting that this was kind of like a secret symbol to his sons that they should say Kaddish for him after he died. The conversos did definitely use a lot of secret messages that they handed down in all kinds of coded forms to their children. Do this behavior to remind you of a particular mitzvah that we have to keep, and so on. So it's not at all impossible, but it's difficult to see this in his signature. Nevertheless, you take all of these things together, and you know, you can add it up for yourself. It's hard to believe that he was actually Jewish. I think it's more likely that he liked the image of being Jewish, and he actively cultivated that with his population. And that's about it for the real question on was Christopher Columbus Jewish? I pause for questions, and I have to tell you the joke. He cultivated.
All right, family, hold on. And I got one more for y'all too that I think y'all will find very interesting. But I hope you all enjoyed just that little clip. Obviously, the Jews don't think he's Jewish, but I mean, obviously, he was trying to find some reasons why he could be breaking down um different words in his letters and things like that, which I don't think was really a good job. But anyway, I want y'all to listen to a little bit of this, and I'm gonna stop it where I want to stop it. But I love watching lectures, y'all. It's one of the favorites that I like to do, especially ones from a minute ago, like 2010, and play things like that, because it really gives a different perspective about then and now and how we see history, and how many things have changed, and how much we've come into in terms of discovery. But I want y'all to listen to a little bit of this, and I'm gonna stop it at a certain point. I'm not gonna listen to the whole thing, but let's get into this.
Saturday at 8 p.m. and midnight Eastern, and Sundays at 1 p.m. This week, history professor William Fowler looks at early Atlantic exploration, Christopher Columbus, and the discovery of the Caribbean and the Americas. This hour-long class took place at Northeastern University in Boston.
Well, welcome back and good morning. Remember the last time we met, we were talking about the Portuguese discoveries, the exploration that they made down the coast of Africa, and also the navigational techniques that they developed, the astrolabe and the compass, the ship's log, etc., and that the Portuguese were the first Europeans to really venture out onto the Atlantic, but they ventured south. They didn't venture west. Keep in mind, too, as someone mentioned in the last class about the world being flat, Europeans did not believe that. 13th, 14th century Europeans knew that the world was round. This map, which is not meant for navigation, shows you first Europeans to really venture out onto the Atlantic, but they ventured south. They didn't venture west. Keep in mind, too, as someone mentioned in the last class about the world being flat, Europeans did not believe that. 13th, 14th century Europeans knew that the world was round. This map, which is not meant for navigation, shows you that this is a 13th century European map of the world.
2012, they were
and you might not be able to make
even
out
in
the
the back
continents and
then,
the countries
they were
here,
thinking
certainly. But you can see that indeed they saw the world as round. The question was not how the shape of the earth, the question was whether or not you could actually make it around the earth. That they knew, theoretically, that if you sailed west, you'd come to the east. But how far that would be, what dangers they would encounter, none of that was known to them. None of that was known to them. While the Portuguese were working their way down the southern coast towards the tip of Africa, techniques that they developed, the astrolabe and the compass, the ship's log, etc., etc., and that the Portuguese were the first Europeans to really venture out onto the Atlantic, but they ventured south. They didn't venture west. Keep in mind, too, as someone mentioned in the last class about the world being flat, Europeans did not believe that. 13th, 14th century Europeans knew that the world was round. This map, which is not meant for navigation, shows you that this is a 13th century European map of the world. And you might not be able to make out the continents and the countries here, certainly, but you can see that indeed they saw the world as round. The question was not how the shape of the earth, the question was whether or not you could actually make it around the earth. That they knew, theoretically, that if you sailed west, you'd come to the east. But how far that would be, what dangers they would encounter, none of that was known to them. None of that was known to them. While the Portuguese were working their way down the southern coast towards the tip of Africa, there were another group of people who were pushing off in a different direction onto the Atlantic. And these, of course, were the Norse, the Vikings, as they're sometimes called. In the common image, of course, the Vikings are seen as ferocious warriors, conquerors, looters. There was a prayer that monks used to offer in medieval Europe: "Dear Lord, protect us from the wrath of the Northmen." Well, some of that's true, certainly. But for the most part,
yeah, this was back in 2012. So imagine, and I want to go more into that too. What did the explorers think what did they think the earth was? You know what I mean? Because just because Europeans didn't think that, we don't know it to be true. I mean, I'm guessing just based off the way maps are drawn, he's trying to draw that conclusion that the world is round because Europeans saw it as so. Yeah. So I find that very interesting. Child, I'm trying to tell you. So I found all this stuff interesting. Like I said, it all connects back to Columbus when it's all said and done. But y'all understand why I went into that, just because of the things that claimed they found. And then just based off that little small presentation that gentleman showed, you know, it just goes to show they don't think so.
Norse Scandinavians were farmers, sea traders, fishermen. For reasons that are not entirely clear, beginning about the year 800, these Norse began to push into the Atlantic. Now, it could have been that there was climate change in Scandinavia that was harming the harvests. It could have been overpopulation, not quite sure. But for whatever reason, the Norse began to leave Scandinavia and venture out onto the Atlantic. Now, they weren't venturing out as explorers. They weren't looking for new continents. They certainly weren't looking for the route to Asia or to China. But they were looking for other places to settle. And so they began to sort of island hop. They'd come from Scandinavia over to the Shetland Islands, to the Faroe Islands, over there to the Hebrides. And you can see from these arrows that they would come down along the coast of England and Ireland, even into Europe and France. And eventually, of course, some would actually get into the Mediterranean. So they were wide-ranging, very wide-ranging. Yeah.
In the map yesterday, you said they went to North America.
Yeah.
Itself.
Yeah.
Have they been like were they documenting this or just kind of going around?
Most of our great question. Where do we get the information about these Vikings? Mostly from what are called the Icelandic sagas, and these are oral traditions that the Vikings, the Norsemen, kept, and were written down around the 13th century. So we don't have actual eyewitness, firsthand accounts of the Norse setting out here on the Atlantic. But we do have these oral traditions from the sagas.
They never do.
Then written down. So they begin to push out. And again, think of these people as kind of...
And that's been the issue with a lot of these historical narratives, bruh. It's like you already know that you don't have any eyewitness accounts to any of this stuff that y'all putting out, but y'all still putting it out there like it's history and like it's facts. This is the insanity of it all. I'm only let him go for a few more minutes, and then I want to show one more, by this professor as well, y'all. Like I said, I was going to keep it brief tonight, but I appreciate everybody coming in, showing love, staying. Please like, share, subscribe. You know what I'm saying? We're here, we're building, and that's what it's all about. I just really, have found that Jewish information very intriguing and very interesting because, I will say that those times people really was hiding who they truly were.
Island hopping. Indeed, the voyages that they're making here in the vessels that they had were probably not more than 2 or 3 days. So they're not going vast out into the Atlantic. And here are the kinds of vessels that they used. Remember, we talked about the Egyptian vessel and the Greek trireme and the Roman warship, and how those vessels, galleys they were, rowed by men, were not really suited for long distance travel or travel on a ferocious ocean. And you can see the Viking longship here is sort of the same way. Not much freeboard. We talked about freeboard, the distance between the top here and the waterline. So rough water would be rough water for this vessel. Relatively small. It's probably about 60 or 70 feet long. And we can see from this is an archaeological excavation, by the way. This is a real Viking longship, longboat. And we can see, too, the remnants of a mast here. So these are the kinds of vessels that these Vikings used to sail out onto the Atlantic. Now, where did they go? Well, we saw on the previous map, they went down the coast of Europe. They went to the Faroe Islands, the Shetland Islands, Ireland, Scotland. Well, they also ventured a little bit further as well. They ventured first over here to Iceland. And again, the journey from the north of Scotland, or the Hebrides Islands, or the Shetland Islands, the Faroe Islands, towards Iceland is not all that far, 300-400 miles maybe. The Vikings began to notice, you might ask, well, why did they sail west at all? Because as they saw in the water, they saw debris coming from the west. They also saw birds. So they understood that there had to be something out there. These birds are coming from somewhere, and the debris in the water has to be coming from somewhere. So that's why they sailed west. About the year 800, again, we have archaeological evidence, but no really pinpointed. But about the year 800, the Vikings arrived in Iceland. And they settled Iceland. They settled there. Not many of them. One of the things that these people encounter, of course, is that the lands here are pretty fragile. I don't know if any of you have ever seen Iceland, but it's not a country that can support a large population, particularly in days of agriculture. And so they couldn't support a large Viking population. About the year 900, one of these Vikings, a man named Eric the Red, ran into some difficulties with local authorities and was apparently exiled out of Iceland and told, go west, get out of here. And he did. But again, he's going in a direction that they think there is something, because look here, between Iceland and Greenland, which we'll see in a moment, not a vast distance. So you can imagine standing on the shore of Iceland, seeing birds flying from the west, seeing debris in the water. So Eric the Red, with a number of vessels, exiled from Iceland, heads west. he heads west and finds Greenland. He sees this, Eric sees this, sort of as an opportunity for real estate development. Greenland, you could probably call it white land. You might want to call it gray land. You might want to call it icy land, rock land. But if you've seen Greenland, you wouldn't think of it as Greenland. But Eric wants to attract people there. So he calls it Greenland. He returns home to Iceland and he tells people he found this green land. And that begins a Viking migration, a Norse migration to Greenland. And they established communities along the south shore of Greenland, the south and southwestern shore of Greenland. These Viking settlements are going to be in Greenland for almost 500 years. Now think about that for a minute.
Wait, what year was it starting?
Around 900 to 1000, okay? So we're talking about a very long period of time. They are here in Greenland 500 years before Columbus. They're here 500 years before Columbus. It's really a remarkable story. Yeah.
So what happened to the Vikings?
Well, that's a great question. What happened? Because we know they weren't there by the time 1500 thereabouts. We know that there are no Viking settlements in Greenland. Again, the evidence is uncertain. It would seem that a couple of things happened.
My bad, y'all. Shit.
Madeline. One is perhaps the climate change. It got colder. We know that from evidence, from climate history, that they have the Little Ice Age, as it's called. So it probably did get colder in Greenland, which of course would impact domestic animals, agriculture, etc. They may have been marauded, attacked by pirates and others. There are lots of people who begin in the 14 and 1500s. There are lots of vessels sailing through there. They might have attacked and sacked some of these towns. There's also something else that's curious and relates back to our friends the Portuguese. One of the big exports from Greenland, what do you think the Greenlanders would be sending back to Iceland and back to Scandinavia? No, Scandinavians have enough ice of their own. But what might they send back? What's value? Well, fish to somebody, huh?
Certain types of lumber, maybe?
Not so much lumber, because they don't have trees. Walrus tusks, ivory. Ivory is really quite valuable. But then the Portuguese, as you know, in the 15th century, the Portuguese pushed down Africa, and what can you get out of Africa? Elephant tusks. So the Portuguese find a greater supply of ivory and cheaper. And it's likely then there's kind of an economic impact here. The Portuguese in Africa have an economic impact on this struggling little community or communities there in Greenland. While these Greenlanders, though, are living here, they too look to the west. One of the things, Matthew, they do lack in Greenland is timber. So they're looking for a source of timber for building, timber for fuel. And they sail west looking for timber. Again, the birds, the debris. And as you can see, not a very long distance as they sail west, and they encounter North America. The first of the Vikings to encounter North America is the son of Eric the Red. He's called Leif Erikson, Leif, the son of Eric. And it's Leif Erikson who ventures west and we know encounters North America. He probably went first to Labrador, which is up on the upper coast here. Didn't find much in the way of timber there. It's a pretty desolate coast. And so he sailed further south until he would find, he's looking for a reasonable place to live, and resources, agriculture, etc. And he finds it. He finds it. On the north, on the tip of Newfoundland, the island of Newfoundland, on the northwest corner, in a little peninsula that juts up, there is a place called Anse-le-Meadow. In the 1960s, Scandinavian archaeologists began to look in this area. Now, it's interesting how they decided to do this. They looked at maps from the 14th and 15th century of this part of the world, primitive to be sure, but these maps did show in gross outline something that looked like Newfoundland. They then began to apply kind of common sense. If you were sailing west from Greenland, what would likely be the first place, looking at tides and currents and winds? And so they sort of narrowed it all down, and they came to this place called Anse-le-Meadow and began excavations. And this is what they found. They found the archaeological remains of the Viking settlement on Newfoundland. This is Leif Erikson's settlement. What you see here is a reconstruction of the homes. Parks Canada, the Canadian equivalent of the American National Park Service, now administers this site. A remarkable place. I've been there several times, and I really, if you have an opportunity, it's a little out of the way, that's for sure, but if you have the opportunity to visit it, it really is quite remarkable to come here and see the actual archaeological site of people who lived in North America, Europeans, not natives obviously, Europeans who lived here in the year 1000. And this is a reconstruction of the kind of huts that they lived in. And here's one of the archaeological digs. You can see, by the way, just in the distance, the shoreline. It's a gentle sloping shore. It's green. I took these photographs in the summertime. I'm not sure what it's like in the winter, but you can see it's a sort of a welcoming place. It doesn't look harsh.
This man tripping. So he's saying, boom, Columbus ain't discovered. These Vikings discovered it. Stop. They don't know what to do with all this information. They don't know how to make it work. They don't know what to do. This is really pathetic. And that's why we got to know truth from fable. So, all right. I'm getting tired of that. Give me a second, y'all.
Say I'm hustling and I'm grinding. I'm making moves with my money on my mind, and I can't fall short. No, always keep it 1,000. Slow mo. Say I'm hustling and I'm grinding. I'm making moves with my money on my mind, and I can't fall short. Always keep it 1,000. Slow mo.
Peace and love to all the Aboriginal Indigenous Indians. Shout out to everybody that's been in and out of the chat. I really appreciate it. Peace to you, the enemy's public, with Brother Nasir. Peace to you, absolutely. Peace and love to my sister Sap, Copper Goddess. Peace and love to all you guys. So look, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about and go into one more lecture that I found interesting. Like I said, I'm not going to hold y'all too long tonight. It's already 9 o'clock. I'm going to try to make sure I hurry this up. And I want to show this interesting lecture. Like I said, a lot of these white people lecture on history in an interesting way. Like it seems like they just tell it exactly like what the book says. So not even just that, like, you know, because they can't really touch on experience, you know what I mean, or real truth. But I want to see what y'all think about this lecture about the Southeast American Indians. And you know who was in the Southeast. So I just want to show like different things, and you know, we can just kind of dialogue about it. And I'm gonna just comment on it because I also found this intriguing. And like I said, the last gentleman, when they were talking about the Vikings basically discovering parts of America and exploring well before Columbus. I mean, I believe people were exploring, you know what I'm saying? But there's that one place that was explored that you didn't see our people already there. So that's how I see it. And I think that that's the part that they leave out. And I'm, you know, it just really confuses me, like to keep connecting it to this African thing. I just don't think that that really has much to do with it. So
That's when the Yamasee War begins. And I've given some other dates. I'm not necessarily going to talk about all of these dates in detail, but I'm going to try to cover roughly 100 years worth of history today. And so I gave you some dates so that you could kind of have placeholders so that you could get a sense of where you were in time. So we can come back to these as we go along.
The American Revolution and the emergence of the United States.
The last time that we spoke, we ended with the Yamasee War. So you can see from the timeline here, I've picked up with 1715. That's when the Yamasee War begins. And I've given some other dates. I'm not necessarily going to talk about all of these dates in detail, but I'm going to try to cover roughly 100 years worth of history today. And so I gave you some dates so that you could kind of have placeholders so that you could get a sense of where you were in time. So we can come back to these as we go along. I've also got some things for you to consider as we talk today. Again, we're going to be covering a lot of different things over quite a span of time. And so consider about how Native people in the Southeast continued to have and demonstrate power in the 18th century. We're going to talk about the impacts that the American Revolution had on Native people in the Southeast. And we're going to finish up with the very first federal Indian policy that we get with the Washington administration. And we'll talk about how Native people respond in that context as well. So just as a reminder, okay, when we talked about the Southeast, kind of at the moment of European contact, we said that this is what our geopolitical map looked like. We spoke about the fact that there was a tremendous amount of ethnic diversity. There was a tremendous amount of political.
have a good look at that map, family.
Diversity, right? But that things begin to change significantly with the onset of the Southeast native slave trade, right? And that, in a sense, commodified an indigenous practice of captive taking. And that violence kind of overtook the general region, and we had a tremendous amount of displacement of people, right? And so we said that through the process of coalescence, people left areas where they had been before. They move into new places in some cases. In other instances, they just kind of move to live with other people that perhaps have a numerical superiority.
So let's stay in context, y'all, because we know the Southeast is Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, Arkansas, Louisiana, sometimes included, Kentucky, sometimes included. So let's understand, you know what I'm saying, what part of the world she's referring to and what part of the United States she referring to where we was at.
Perhaps have a superiority in terms of their availability of resources, right? And while this map isn't perfect, okay, because it's certainly lacking an indigenous presence in North Carolina that we know is there, as well as continued indigenous presence in places like Georgia, Florida, and certainly in Mississippi and Louisiana. But this is a good map to think about in terms of how colonial and native interactions play out for the rest of the 18th century, because these individuals that are kind of represented here are those that wind up in all of those colonial records interacting with people during that time. But certainly, Native people, right? This is not how they saw their world, right? Or how they saw the geopolitical space in which they inhabited. And to get a better sense of how they saw themselves, I have a Chickasaw map here for you. So this is actually an English copy on paper of a map that was drawn by a Chickasaw headman in 1723 on deerskin. He presented it to the colonial governor of South Carolina. So I want you to take a minute, if you don't mind, and just, if you'll raise your hand and tell me some of the things that you see here. Jacob.
I see a guy with a bow.
Okay, so we've got an individual, so we have a human presence on the map. Good. Thomas?
I was wondering if those little lines, they kind of look like connections between different types of tribes or people. So could it be like trade routes? Or...
Good. Yeah, absolutely. Very good, Thomas. So you can see at the line kind of at the top that says Cherokee Path. And then one of the lower lines says Creek and English Path. So that's good. Trade paths, certainly. Anything else that you notice? Leanna?
The bigger circles and there's smaller circles. So is that like the bigger nations or the bigger tribal areas and then the smaller groups of people?
Okay, good. So we have different size circles, right? So we have some smaller circles and perhaps those represent groups that are smaller in terms of their population. We have some bigger circles that represent perhaps groups that have larger populations. But something else maybe to consider too is how Chickasaw people would have been understanding their world, right? And maybe it's not so much a question of population numbers, but the larger the circle represents the importance or the role that that particular group plays in their lives and their daily interaction, right? So we can see that the Chickasaw circle is at the very center of the map, right? Which indicates for us that Chickasaw people, maybe not surprisingly, imagine themselves at the center of their own world, right? And everything else radiates out from that. Chickasaw people at this moment in time in the 18th century are certainly not as populous as the Cherokee. And those circles are basically the same size, right? So perhaps the size of the circle then is meant to indicate influence, right? And again, the importance of a particular group in their life. You'll notice that the Cherokee path, there's a pretty wide path. The line there is wide, and it connects directly to the Cherokee circle. This suggests to us that that relationship was probably healthy. Yes? Makes sense? We'll notice too, it's no coincidence that the line connecting the Chickasaw to the English, that's a good wide path. And we know that the English or British at this time and the Chickasaw were very closely allied together. the Chickasaw and the British had a really good, healthy trading relationship with one another. But notice that line doesn't stop in Creek country and pick up the other side. It goes through it, which suggests maybe that there's not a close connection there. Like, this is certainly a group that we have to recognize, right? This is certainly a group that we kind of have to think about in terms of our geopolitical situation, but this is not necessarily a group that we have a close alliance with, right? And then again, I think as many of y'all have indicated, these smaller circles represent groups that, are further away, certainly less of a relationship, right? But another really interesting thing too, I think, about this map is you'll notice that the line between the Chickasaw and the Choctaw, there's a line there, but it's narrow. It's narrow. The Chickasaw and the Choctaw were generational enemies. They had been raiding on each other for generations and taking captives. And so this map indicates that while there is some interaction that takes place, right, that path between them is narrow. And oftentimes language, when talking about paths, historic Native people use language about broad paths versus narrow paths. Broad paths indicated that there was a good, healthy relationship. Narrow paths, when they talked about narrow paths existing, that oftentimes indicated, conflict or animosity. And it's really fascinating that we can actually see that drawn here for us. So again, I think one of the major takeaways here is to really consider the fact that we're not that far removed from this period of tremendous violence, right? But Native people in the 18th century are feeling very secure in where they are politically, right? This is meant to communicate a principal place and location of the Chickasaw people within this colonial system. And it's also really instructive for us to consider the fact that the English circle is no bigger than any other circle. As we so often kind of think about these stories and we think about this history from this very colonial sort of mindset and imagine the fact that, colonists arrive and then that was it. That was the end of the story for Native people. And that's just not true, right? As we've already discussed in this class, you were either a member of a particular community or you were an outsider. And we see that for us here. The English have no greater or larger presence in the Chickasaw understanding of their world than the Cherokee or the Creek or arguably even the Choctaw. And so those are just some really important things to think about as we kind of move through the 18th century. All right, so trade is very important, right? No longer are we trading in enslaved captives, right? The Yamasee War effectively ended the Southeast Native slave trade. But deerskins continue to be a hot commodity, all right? And Native people in the Southeast, particularly in the 18th century, are able to take advantage of their geographic position in a way that Native people in other areas don't have access to. So if you're looking at this map, we don't necessarily see a Native presence here, but the three major European powers that have a presence on the North American continent are illustrated here. Spanish are green, the English are red, British are red, the French are blue. Do you see the area where they all kind of converge? The Southeast, right? And so what this meant for Southeastern Native people, they had choices. They had choices, right? You don't have to just go to Food Lion. There's a Publix, there's a Kroger. Goodness gracious me, there could even be a Harris Teeter or something like that. I don't know. Dream big, right? Dream big. And so they had options. They had different trading relationships that they could go to with their deerskins. They didn't just have one place. And so what this meant then is that they could, kind of see what was on offer and then say, well, this is really great, but you know what? I could get much better things for cheaper if I went to the British. And because historians are really good at naming things, we call this the playoff system. Playoff. That was a joke. Y'all were meant to laugh. It meant, very good, thank you. So what that meant is that the individual native groups would play European powers off of one another, right? Because just as native people during this time are seeing themselves as distinct, independent groups, right? It's also good to remind ourselves that in the 18th century, Europeans weren't going around high-fiving themselves going, we're all Europeans, that's great, right? We're all one people. Not true, not true, right? The British and the French spent the entire 18th century at war with one another almost. Yes? Yes. So native people are able to take advantage of this. They're able to take advantage of like all of this conflict and disagreement and things, fights over who's going to be king and queen of what country in Europe. And they're able to use it for their benefit in North America by saying things like, there's a dude at a fort over there who, you know, said that he could give me better things if we made an alliance. And I just wanted you to know that there is a dude over there at that other fort that I could maybe make an alliance with, right? And the British and the French in particular were so paranoid all the time about what each other were doing. They're like writing back and forth to Paris and to London about like this person and this group over here is doing this and they've gone over here and they're doing that. And it's like Armageddon all the time. And native people are taking advantage of that and using it to facilitate what is in their best interests, okay? And that works fantastically for a really long time until we get to about 1763, okay? So 1763, we get the Treaty of Paris. Again, because we're really good at naming things. It was a treaty signed in Paris. Yeah, absolutely. And the Treaty of Paris ended the French and Indian War. Okay, so there had been a number.
Okay. So the way she explained it, I don't know why she explained it this way. Like obviously there's a disconnect here. But give me a second, y'all, because she's crazy.
To Paris and to London about like this person and this group over here is doing this and they've gone over here and they're doing that and it's like Armageddon all the time. And native people are taking advantage of that and using it to facilitate what is in their best interests, okay? And that works fantastically for a really long time until we get to about 1763, okay? So 1763, we get the Treaty of Paris. Again, because we're really good at naming things. It was a treaty signed in Paris. Yeah, absolutely. And the Treaty of Paris ended the French and Indian War. Okay, so there had been a number of conflicts, again, particularly between the British and the French. Oftentimes there was like a European theater to these conflicts and it would flow over to North America. This is the last one of these. It's called the 7 Years' War in a broader world context, but on the North American continent, it's called the French and Indian War. And the outcome of that essentially meant that there wasn't a French presence any longer. Okay, so that option that was there to say like, hey, there's this French dude at this fort over here. I'm going to go talk to him if you don't, you know, give me what I want. That option does go away, right? And so that the playoff system that had worked so well for so long ceases to exist as effective way to engage in diplomacy and kind of get the trade goods that were desired. All right. Some other important things that happen with this treaty, the end of the French and Indian War, and events that follow. So one of the things that the British do within the context of the French and Indian War that will ultimately help kind of swing things in their favor is they will promise Native people that they will set a hard Western boundary. That boundary essentially follows the Appalachian Mountains. So if you're looking at this map, that kind of crisscross red and blue area, it's kind of like roughly in that region, right? The British promised Native people, we won't allow settlement beyond that line. We'll keep all of our settlers east of this particular line. And again, that was in exchange, Native people agreed to stop supporting the French. Like, not necessarily fight with the British, but at least kind of take a position of neutrality. All right? So when the British ultimately have victory in the French and Indian War, they do try to uphold this agreement that they established of holding this line. But you have all of these British colonists that don't want to mind the line. They don't want to mind the line. A number of them are going to argue, pardon me, we went to war in the first place to gain access to this territory, and now you're telling us we can't have it. We don't like that. And so there's going to be increased tensions because settlers just continually ignore the line. And then British officials are having to then continually go to Native groups and say, can we sign another document that recognizes another different boundary that's a little bit further west than the last one that we agreed to? Make sense? Okay. Another important thing, though, to keep in mind here.
Yeah. I don't know why she's keeping out. Sorry, y'all. Keeping out the Iroquois Confederacy and all of that. I don't understand that. But it seems like she's only focused on the 5 tribes. Because, hold up. Because I thought that the French Indian War was, I mean, there's obviously tissue going on in North America with both the French and the British. I guess there was some bullshit going on with who was controlling the 13 colonies, especially, seeing as though certain confederacies owned and controlled a lot of these states, particularly like upstate New York and Pennsylvania, places like that. Like I said, I don't know why she didn't really touch on the French and Indian War.
Too, is we don't just have, like Joe Pioneer going out into the woods with his family to build a cabin, right? You also have politically prominent individuals who want access to this territory so that they can engage in land speculation, because there's money to be made when one speculates in land. Some fairly prominent people, like, I don't know. Anybody heard of George Washington? This is a person that fought in the French and Indian War who really had designs on some of that Ohio country that then was like, what do you mean we can't have it? And was a little salty about it. Now, this is not the reason for independence, okay? I'm going to restate that again so we don't get confused. It is not the reason for independence, but it does factor into the reasons for independence, right? People want access to that territory. They're frustrated with the British government that won't give them access to it, right? And so you have a situation with a number of other factors, right? But ultimately, relationships with land and native presence on land is a reason why there is a call for independence, particularly if you're a Southerner, right? These issues are very important to you. Now, from the native perspective, right, you had an agreement, and the British keep coming back to you over and over again, telling you that you need to move the boundary. You agree to a boundary, and then the next thing you know, all of these settlers have already crossed over the boundary. You're starting to get really frustrated about it. And occasionally you might respond in a way considered to be unkind by others, right? And so it just continues to create a lot of tension. And ultimately, a group of Native people in the South are going to get so frustrated that they're going to attack a number of Southern settlements in 1776. Attacks are going to happen from Virginia all the way down to Georgia. And that's why
and what I find fascinating about this is that they claim all of this was going on while the so-called slave trade was going on too. All of this was going on at one time. Y'all are crazy. Who were the true people fighting in these wars?
Thomas Jefferson refers to the merciless Indian savages in the Declaration of Independence, because those attacks happened in the summer of 1776. Thomas Jefferson, being from Virginia, takes it rather personally. All right. So a lot of people tend to think about the Revolution as a New England thing, a Northern thing. Like it started with militiamen in and around Boston, maybe, or something like that. And then, I don't know, somehow we got to Yorktown and Washington won, right? That's kind of how a lot of people think of it. But in fact, the Southern campaign of the American Revolution was the decisive campaign of the entire conflict. You can see from the map on the left that the majority of that conflict took place in the Carolinas, but certainly Native people throughout the Southeast were kind of enveloped into this, because there are going to be raids and things that are happening in Florida. You're going to have raids and events that are going to be occurring along the Mississippi River and in places in and around Louisiana. And so all of the Southern Native nations are going to wind up kind of caught up into this. And they have to make decisions about who to support. And these decisions were not universal. Just like as colonists, we're having to make decisions about, do I want to be a patriot or do I want to support the crown, right? Native people were having to make decisions about, do we want to kind of back and support these people that are trying to get independence from Britain, or do we want to back and support these people that are still saying that they're British? Or maybe, is it possible, could we just stay home? Is that possible? Like, those conversations are happening as well. And individuals make individual choices. We can't look at this map and say one nation decided to do X, Y, Z, because in many cases, well, in all the cases, it wasn't as simple as that. Individuals within those nations kind of went one way or the other. But some of the interesting things to consider here is the fact that as military activity heated up in the South, so too did attacks on Native communities. So you can see from this map that most of the fighting that took place in the Carolinas is going to be happening in 1780 and 1781. So this is just a Cherokee example, because it's too much to try to do them all, but this is just a Cherokee example. And you can see that in 1780 and 1781, you know, that's kind of a high point of when towns are attacked. And it's happening within this context of revolution activity that's taking place in and around Cherokee country. And certainly the same can be said for Creek country, Chickasaw country, Choctaw country, and other areas, and certainly the Catawba, right, and other areas of the Carolinas are being enveloped in all of this as well. But I wanted to place emphasis here because this conflict, there are essentially two conflicts that are happening, right? You've got this war for independence in which Americans or Whigs or whatever you want to call them are fighting for independence from Britain. But within that, you also have Native Southerners, not all of them, okay, let's be clear, not all of them, but some groups from all of these tribes that have said, we're tired of all of this settler encroachment. We're going to do something about it. You just burned 23 of our towns to the ground. We feel like we should respond. And so you have that conflict happening within this broader revolutionary era. And you have groups of Native people that had been enemies that are now coming together to fight together against American colonists. For example, the Cherokee and the Creek start fighting and raiding with one another at the end of the Yamasee War. They don't eventually kind of make a peace with one another until 1755. So you're just a generation removed from constant raiding between the two of them. And now they're coming together because they see in this moment that they have a common enemy and that it would be better if they could work together to face this common enemy. It's an incredibly exciting time in Native history because we see a pan-Indian alliance coming together that we had never seen before. You have the most populous groups of Southern natives that begin to engage in intensive diplomacy with one another to try to establish this pan-Indian alliance. You have the Creeks, you have the Cherokees, you have the Chickasaws, you have the Choctaws. The documents include some other smaller groups, but these guys are sending diplomats multiple times a year to each other, trying to facilitate a political alliance. And again, like, we're just not that far removed from these groups raiding each other, being at war with one another, considering each other enemies. But even though this is such extreme, violent colonial pressure, Native people aren't saying like, oh, well, this is too much. We might as well just stop here. It's over. Let's go home. No, they're coming up with new ways, creative ways to address these issues, working together in a way that they had never done before. And they go to places like Florida to meet together. They go to places like Louisiana to meet together. And one of the other things that's making all of this work is the Spanish, who are like, hey guys, this is cool, this thing that you're doing. We're totally in favor of it. How about we help you by giving you guns and ammunition, right? Because it's very difficult to go to war without guns and ammunition. And so the Spanish say, we'll do that for you. And it's such an exciting moment of people working together. Unfortunately, it doesn't last. So, first problem. So, remember how that line went through Creek Country but didn't stop in Creek Country from Chickasaw Country? So the Chickasaw and the Creek wind up falling out with each other because it's like that. You know, sometimes things are just too hard to overcome. And so even though there were efforts on the parts of others to try to kind of like patch that up, the Chickasaw are like, no, can't have any, like, we're done here, not dealing with that anymore. And so the Chickasaw kind of fall out of the alliance. And so that was a bummer for sure. And then other things happen further afield. Raise your hand if you've heard of Napoleon. Yes, right. So he started doing things around this time in Europe. And the Spanish responded by saying, while we were here for you and cared very much about this thing that you had going on and saw how it could benefit us, and so we were in support of it. Turns out, we got this other thing going on over here now that's kind of a big deal. And we, in fact, need to funnel all of our resources over here. And so sorry, can't help any longer. You know what would be a really good idea? In fact, we've thought about it. You should just, sign peace treaties with those Americans. They're probably good people after all. I mean, I don't know. Anyway, this thing over here, we have to go buy. And so without any sort of support, the guns.
I know you ain't just write that in my chat. I know. I know you ain't write that in my chat just now. What happened? I don't want to ask what happened, but what the fuck? What? Wild Savage. What happened to him? Oh my, I don't like to ask what happened to people, but god dang, I shouldn't be asking what happened. But like, how did this happen is a better word. Like, what in the world? I'm just stunned and shocked right now. Hold up, Mo. I gotta stop doing what I'm doing. Let me drop the link for my bro. Rest in peace to Uncle Richard Neil Bay. If that's true, that better not be true, young. I don't even believe that right now. Just give me a second, y'all. I'm sorry. Go ahead, OTK. Hit the link and come on. Right. I'm not trying to believe that. Give me a second, y'all. Because that's crazy work. That better not be true about my uncle. Peace of love, OTK. How you doing?
Hey sis. Hey sis.
How you doing?
I'm good. Oh man.
Is this
Life
true?
is crazy. Life is crazy, sis. Yes, it is true. I just got off the phone with Goddess K Glover L.
Oh my God.
And she told me to let all of y'all know that yeah, it ain't no hoax. It is true. Heart attack.
Oh
The
my God.
brother was at the gas station earlier and a group of girls pulled up on him because the car looked similar to an altercation these girls been into. They pulled out with guns and shit like that on him and almost killed him in the gas station parking lot. And that right there had him agitated and had him in oh man.
No.
Yeah, man.
No. Oh my
Uh
God. No. Oh my goodness. Condolences to my sister K Glover L, my auntie.
I'm gonna shoot you the number too.
I'm gonna make sure I reach out and do my due diligence on my end. And wow. That's why we gotta
And I've been watching him post every morning, man. For the last couple of mornings, he been posting something to start the day out. You know, morning bill, riding and cycling. So that's what's even more crazy. A heart attack and you exercising. I mean, bro is exercising every day on the bike. You know what I mean? It's crazy, man.
Right, right.
I think that might have broke. It is a such thing as dying of heartbreak. I don't care what nobody say. Ain't nobody can prove that it ain't. And I think that broke his heart for that to happen, knowing that he's trying to reach the youth. All he preach about is food, clothes, and shelter.
Yeah.
But I don't think he expected that to come from females, and I think that took him for a loop.
And that's a sad situation to oh my God. Rest in peace, Uncle Richard Neal Bay. That's not right. I'm not even feeling that in my spirit right now to even know that he's no longer with us. I just can't even bear that right now.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's crazy. Yeah, but sis, that's why I come up to let you know that, man. So it wouldn't be no speculation.
No, thank you for letting me know. And like I'm gonna reach out to sis K Glover L, and I hope everybody else does too. And like, just remember to cherish life and cherish your family and your friends. And you never know, man. You never know when it's our last days here. You just never know. So on that note, I want to do something real quick, and then I'm gonna go ahead and get out of here.
Boom, 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 boom. Tell me what you gonna do when it ain't nowhere to run. When judgment comes for you, when judgment comes for you, what you gonna do when it ain't nowhere to hide? When judgment comes for you, 'cause it's gonna come for you. Easy, see something Charlie, little boo guy's got him, and I'm gonna miss everybody out of roll and flow like I ain't looked at a while. And play for dust, and they play too deep for being sad. Little legs I got to be, tell me your feature the seats for them, please. Marry me by my grand, when you can go follow God bless you, working on the plan to heaven. Follow the Lord on 24/7 days. God is who we praise, even though the devil's all up in my face, but he keeping me safe and in my place. Say grace to the gates of race, but I change the face of judge, and I got my soul with books. Grudge because there's no mercy for thugs. Ooh, what can I do? It's all about the family and how we grow. Can I get a witness? Let it unfold. We live in our lives, we turn our soul. Hey, hey. And we're praying, we're praying, we're praying, we're praying. Every day, every day, every day, every day. And we're praying, we're praying, we're praying, we're praying. Still with laces. Now follow me, Roscoe. Weather is till it's 7. Come, let's go take a visit to the people that's long gone there. While ladies, they're terrible. Instead of keeping up with family, exactly how many days we got lasting? While you laughing, we're passing the way. We all rest our souls, 'cause I know I'ma meet you up at the crossroad. Y'all know if I ever got love with them both thugs, baby. Long gone, really wish you could come home. But when it's time to die, gotta go bye-bye. All the little thug could do was cry. Why they kill my dog? Yeah, man, I miss my Uncle Charles, y'all. And he should be gone in front of his home. When they did, the rule was wrong. Wrong. Gotta hold on, gotta stay strong. When it did comes, better believe on. Gotta show that you can lean on. And we pray, we pray, we pray, we pray. Every day, every day, every day, every day. And we pray, we pray, we pray, we pray. Every day. See you at the crossroads. 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 And I'm gonna miss everybody. And I'm gonna miss everybody. And I'm gonna miss everybody. And I'm gonna.
All right, y'all. Look, man. Rest in peace to Richard Hill, babe. He always supported me. He always supported me from day one. My God, that's so heartbreaking to hear. From day one, and he believed in me, believed in my message, believed in who I am as a person, and always encouraged me to keep going. God, rest in peace, Uncle Richard Nail Bay. That's unbelievable. You know, I just can't even believe that right now. I had to really kind of segue from what I was doing and just take a second to really remember him and appreciate him. And I'm gonna do one more thing, and then we're gonna get out of here. It's not on there. All right. So anyway, that's all I got for y'all today. I can't even get back on what I was on. So y'all stay safe. Y'all have a great night. I'm sorry that I got to get off of here because I can't even believe that news. And I got to take a second. So y'all take care.